Sean, Laura, Merkins, Nikolai, only 13 days to go until the great Easter Vigil. And there's excitement in the air today as we celebrate the third scrutiny with you. And we are all so very, very happy for you. There's so much going on in today's gospel at so many different levels. There's death, accusations, anger, human angst, resurrection, and the promise of life eternal. Jesus hears that his friend, the one he loved, is ill, and it is probably terminal. And he does a seemingly strange thing. He lingers for 2 days, and his friend dies. Jesus arrives after Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days. And after this length of time, everyone knows that Lazarus is indeed dead, that he is not in some sort of a coma or catatonic state. Remember that many Jews of the day believed that the soul would hover over a dead body for 3 days. But after the 4th day, there was no chance of reuniting and resurrection or resuscitation. But Jesus will raise Lazarus from the dead, the last of the 7 signs found in John's Gospel. Remember, the first being at the wedding feast at Cana. And John calls these acts of power signs, not miracles. And these signs were manifestations of God's active presence through Jesus who performed them. And Jesus is not going to raise Lazarus from the dead as though it was some trick performed to increase his following. He is doing so for the glory of God, and so that others might come to faith in him as the one sent from God, God's Son. When Jesus finally does arrive, he is met with an accusatory statement from the sisters, or perhaps one of hope. If you had been here, our brother would not have died. And I can certainly read into this an undertone of disappointment and resentment, and perhaps even anger. Where were you when we needed you the most? We ask that question sometimes in one form or another. Why do bad things happen to us and those that we love? If God so loves the world, why is there so much horror in it for so many people? Why don't we get a quick response to our prayers in situations that are desperate? And insinuated in these questions is, where were you when we needed you the most? We may not have the answers, but what we do have is faith. This gospel today invites us to faith. And here, faith is a verb. We live faith. When Jesus tells Martha, your brother will rise again, she professes faith that he will rise in the resurrection on the last day, a belief held by many Jews of the time. But then she professes her faith in Christ as the Son of God, the one who is coming into the world. But neither Martha nor Mary expresses faith that Jesus will resuscitate their brother then and there. We don't have all the answers to our questions, to all of our questions. But like Martha and Mary, we do have a sign of what Jesus did for them and for Lazarus and the people who were the witnesses that day. This passage today that we just heard contains the shortest verse in the New Testament. And to me, it is one of the most revealing verses in all of Scriptures. And Jesus wept. But notice, it is bracketed on both sides by Jesus was perturbed. Some scholars say that Jesus wept because of the lack of faith of those around him, and that perhaps he would never be fully understood, or that people would not have full faith in him. But perhaps no other single verse in the gospel shows Jesus in his humanness. When he sees the weeping of Mary and her friends, he does not tell her, "Your brother will rise again," as he did with Martha. Indeed, he becomes greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. And why, we might ask? After all, he was the proximate cause of the whole situation. Yet, confronted by a searing loss that brings physical death to the one he loves, Jesus begins to cry. And again, we might ask why. He can raise Lazarus from the dead. He knows that death will not have the final say over this life or any human life. Yet at this moment, the human reality of death affects Jesus in a way that it had not ever done before. Remember the son's widow of Nain and the official's daughter, both dead. But here he sees and experiences death viscerally. He is there with his friends. He experiences the suffering of death as a human being, feeling the loss that is shuddering through all of his friends, and he weeps. We remember, especially during this Lent, that for our sake he will take on this same death in order to save us from death. For he saw the tears of others and cried tears of mourning with them. And even though Jesus is central figure in this passage, I'd like to return to Lazarus for a moment. His very name is a shortened form of Eleazar, which means God helps. And there are some people that say the name foreshadows the events that will take place. And Lazarus represents each of us. In the tomb, he was bound by death. And how many apparently alive people are closed in by some form of death or another? A slow death by fear or anxiety or dependence or sickness or maybe a dead-end job or disintegrating relationships or destructive behavior. Whatever the forms of death, serious physically or life-sapping, we need to hear the voice of Jesus call us out today, each and every one of us. Come out. Our identification with Lazarus runs through the whole story, right up to the end. When he emerged from the tomb, Jesus ordered people, as though they were not going to do this, untie him and let him go. And I would think that Lazarus, freed from the grip of death, would have returned to life a very changed man. Don't you believe that Lazarus would have had a whole new appreciation of life, the way that people who survive serious illnesses do? I once had a cancer survivor tell me that now I don't sweat the small stuff. I imagine Lazarus would have appreciated and returned the love his sisters had for him, and that he would have been grateful and celebrated the simple gifts that he might have otherwise and previously overlooked. Family meals, laughter with family and friends, a baby's smile, wildflowers in the sky. As Lent ends, we come to new life through Christ's resurrection. We join Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, and the many who were with them. All of those who had seen what he had done began to believe in him. It is now that we evaluate how we live. We notice our misplaced priorities and focus on the present life we have in Christ and the promise of the future he offers to each and every one of us. And the future is this: I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even if he dies, will live. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die.